Hi, I'm Paul from Velo, and in today's video I'm going to give you 5 top tips for looking after your Brompton between services. Come join me. So it's really important to have your Brompton serviced at least once a year, maybe twice a year under heavy use. But what can you do in between to keep your Brompton tip top? So tip 1, pump your tyres. Super important to keep your tyres pumped up. Every time we do a video about PSI, it all brings up this whole conversation. A Brompton tyre is 110 PSI, and some people think that is crazy. But I generally won't go out without 90, 100, usually 110 PSI, just because the bike's relatively flexible, so I feel as though I can have that higher PSI. The reason you don't really want to go to a lower PSI is it puts pressure on the sidewalls of the tyre. So if this is a tyre and it's pumped up nice, you're going to be riding on this bit and the tyre can keep its shape. Whereas if you let that go below, the tyre will do this and it pushes on the sidewall. And what happens is, I can always tell as a mechanic if someone's been riding their bike under the recommended PSI, because the sidewall starts to crack. And so that's really important for the longevity of your tyres. It's also important to protect the rims and make sure that you don't have pinch punctures, which is where the tyre can fall into little cracks and the inner tube can get pinched. So tip number 1, pump your tyres, and the best way to do it is with a track pump. The pump that you get on the side of the Brompton is lovely for emergencies, but you're going to really struggle to get it up to that higher PSI. So definitely worth investing in a track pump. Tip number 2 is keep your Brompton clean. You can see another video on this that we've done, and it's just here, but it's really important. They're made of steel and they can really suffer if they're not looked after. Trust me, I've worked on some that have real heavy use. I know practically it's not easy to keep it clean, especially if you're using it every day, but the Brompton will thank you for it. Especially the rear triangle area around the rear pivot. It's really important to keep that area clean, and watch our video for the best way to keep your Brompton clean. Tip 3, look after your chain. It's much easier to do if you follow tip 2 and keep your Brompton clean. What you're looking to do is you're looking to make sure your chain doesn't get rusty. Chains wear over time, and these bushes wear, and it increases the gaps in the chain, which then wears down the sprockets and the chain ring. What you can do to prevent that wear increasing quickly is you can just lubricate each roller or each chain link. How often? It depends on many factors. If you're in the rain, if it's winter all the time, you need to lubricate your chain more regularly. You can actually see that this chain looks quite dry, because that's because I've been using a dry lubricant. It's a dry lubricant for drier weather. It's thinner, and a heavier oil for heavy weather. The main issue with using heavy oil all the time is it can almost act like a magnet and draw loads of rubbish from the road. So you don't want to over lubricate the chain. What I would do, I would say, every few weeks, if it's really heavy rain, if you're out in muck and everything, once you've cleaned your bike. If you clean your bike, you should lubricate your chain. If it's in the summer and we've had quite a dry summer, you may only need to lubricate it every month or something like that. What you want to do is just make sure it looks nice and healthy and has a little glisten to it. You don't really want to get it so it's black and full of filth because you've been using too much wet lubricant. If you do dab each of the links, then what you want to do is once you've done that, you spin it round, and then you wipe off any excess, and that should be good to go. It will just be about learning about the environment that you cycle in and how often you need to lubricate your chain. There's lots of different lubricants as well. You can put wax on. So have a look at the manufacturer's recommendations, but definitely keep on top of your chain because your bike will thank you. Tip 4, check your brake pads for wear. I presume you're going to want to stop on your Brompton, and I presume you don't want to hear metal on metal. So that's when you've worn your brake pads down so much, the shoe that holds the brake pad or the back of the brake pad is basically grinding on your rims. No one wants that. It's not good. On your brake pads, there'll be a little line that will say wear line, and you don't want to be taking the brake pads beyond that limit. So it's really good once you cleaned your bike, lubricated your chain, it's really good to have a look at your brake pads and see where you are. If you're past that line, replace the pads or take it to your bike shop to get a brake service. And tip 5, once your bike's clean and you've done all the other checks, really good idea to lubricate various parts of the Brompton. I use wet lubricant or dry lubricant, depending on the weather, depending on the application. So I'll show you the parts of the Brompton that I like to lubricate. Shifters. So shifters do get stiff on this older model. They do actually need taking apart and greasing a little bit, but not over greasing. But it's good just to always have a rag underneath, especially if you're in the house, just to spray a little bit of dry lubricant in the shifter. Most shifters will benefit from this, and it will just help everything move that little bit better. Next, your brake cables. Now on Bromptons, it's got a full length cable going to all of the cable operated parts. So that means you have a full outer cable and running all the way along till it meets the component that it's changing gears or operating the brakes, which does mean less corrosion can go in rather than it being separate bits of cable. But it never hurts to just lubricate your cable. And you can see that will slowly make its way down the cable and just allow the brakes to operate a bit better. Don't use loads because it will just go everywhere. Make sure you use your rag. Next, the hinges. They do enjoy a little bit of lubrication. During a service, these threads I actually grease. So that should be done on a service. So don't worry about that now, but it's definitely worth putting a bit of wet lubricant into the hinge. Let it go into place and watch your fingers. Work it in. And then just wipe off any excess. Or go inside as well. Just remember, any lubricant you leave on your bike will be a bit of a magnet, especially the wet, for attracting dust and rubbish and yeah, just horrible stuff. So make sure it's all wiped off. Then we can do this one as well. What I generally do with this one is just open it slightly. Be careful because the bike will feel a bit wobbly. And then hold it carefully and then just wiggly, wiggly, wiggly. And as we've just applied it on the outside, there we go. So the jockey wheels like a little bit of a lubrication. You can do this when you do your chain. They just like a little bit in there. I like to just lubricate. There's a little wheel in here that guides the cable. It's a cable guide for the rear hub. I like just giving a bit of dry lubricant in there. It doesn't really need much, but why not give it a little treat? And then finally, I like to lubricate just underneath, on this one in particular, underneath the seat post. That's just a little spray. As this area here is a little bit more exposed to the weather, so I just like to spray a bit of dry lubricant in there. Dry lubricant expels water and just helps with any areas that are vulnerable to rust. It kind of removes the water from that area. So I like to just treat the Brompton in those specific places. And then finally, you can always just do a little bit of dry lubricant around the sleeve of the seat post. Sometimes this hinge. Doesn't need to be over the top. And again, just wipe off any excess. Usually seat posts are greased in kind of a regular bike, but this one isn't. So it just, a little bit of that just helps the process of the seat post coming up and down. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Let us know what you think about the 5 top tips. Are there any that you would add to the list? It's always worth, with any bike, when you're checking it over, going around and doing a visual check of bolts. If there's anything that's worrying, or especially if there's any cracks or anything like that. So that's always worth doing no matter what bike you are looking after. But hopefully if you do this regularly, you'll be able to look after your Brompton between services and do what I've done with this 10-year-old Brompton, which is pretty much, I would say, in new condition. And these are the processes that I follow to keep this nice and sweet. So thanks for watching, and please subscribe.